Hello, sir.
Hello, Chezi. How's it going?
Good. So you received a lift,
I received I have a container here that I need to load now.
a container that you need to load. I got you. Okay, so
Mhm.
this became very real now.
Yep, there is a container in the parking spot, and something needs to be done with it.
And something needs to be done with it. Okay, but this
Mhm.
isn't like a U-Haul like that you're driving down, right? This is just
I'm not gonna be driving a U-Haul. Even though I'm gonna drive my own car. Uh, we're gonna have like a 9-hour trip out of it, so it's gonna be.
a 9-hour trip. I mean, obviously there'll be some stops, but is there like a podcast mix ready? Is there like music?
We need to still make those decisions. Yeah.
I see. All right. All right. Big
Mhm.
decisions. Wait, when is the exact move?
Next week, I think Wednesday is the time, is the day. If
Wow.
everything
I
goes.
mean, I'm sure we'll talk after your move, but regardless, it's another another exciting adventure. So I'm excited
Mhm.
for you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Do you want to? Okay, you did share. I'm gonna add it to the stream. I'm sorry. Okay, there we go.
Yeah,
Okay.
so let me see.
We were in number Mishnah Daled. I think so.
Mhm. Yeah,
Okay.
so I'm using a new source here. I found that the Chabad also has like this. They have their
Cool.
own new version that kind of feels a lot more like Safari, but I think this will be better for us.
All right. So let's take it away. Who Haya Omer? Who were we reading beforehand with this Rabbi Gamliel? I believe so. You mind
This would
scrolling up?
be, I think so. Yeah, the son of Yudanasi.
Right, right. We're still continuing with like Hill's descendants over here.
Yeah.
Rabbi Gamliel. Okay, so this is the who. Who Haya Omer? עשה רצונו כרצונך, כדי שיעשה רצונך כרצונו. בטל רצונך מפני רצונו, כדי שיבטל רצון אחרים מפני רצונך. הלל אומר, אל תפרוש מן הציבור, ואל תאמין בעצמך עד יום מותך. ואל תדון את חברך עד שתגיע למקומו, ואל תאמר דבר שאי אפשר לשמוע, שסופו להישמע. ואל תאמר לכשאפנה אשנה, שמא לא תפנה. So, in English we have over here, he would say, Rabbi Gamliel would say, make that his will should be your will, so that he should make your will to be his will. Nullify your will before his will, so that he should nullify the will of others before your will. Hillel would say, do not separate yourself from the community. Do not believe in yourself until the day you die. Do not judge your fellow until you have stood in his place. Do not say something that is not readily understood in the belief that it will ultimately be understood. Do not say something that ought not to be heard, even in the strictest confidence, for ultimately it will be heard. And do not say, when I free myself of my concerns, I will study, for perhaps you will never free yourself. All right. Also very dramatic. Big statements over here. Okay.
Mhm.
So עשה רצונך כרצונו, כדי שיהיה רצונך כרצונו. So make that his will, how do they say it in English? Over here, it's interesting to see the translation again. Make
It'd
that
be
his
your
will
will.
your
Yeah.
will, so that he should make your will to be as his will. So this is the eternal quest basically for like change, like inside yourself, and you want to orient yourself ultimately towards God. So we're taking make sure that his will, God's will, is what you want, and therefore what you want would match up to what he wants. And this
Mhm.
has to do with the concept of God's ratzon, God's will, right? Which is, I mentioned this in the past, there's like also a hey, Richard. I'm going to add Richard on. Richard, hello. So we are reading over here Pirkei Avot. I don't know if you're aware of about that. This is not really a just chatting stream. This is more of like a specific class, which you're obviously welcome to listen to, ask questions, but it's more focused on like we're going through these different sections. But we're happy you're here with us, sir, and I hope you've been having a good day.
I just wanted to sit and listen to you guys talk about it. I'm at work right now, so.
All right, so I'm gonna mute you. Any questions come up, just let us know. Where were we? Okay, so there's God's will and there's also God's wisdom. I mean, like a lot of God's wisdom and seeing God through nature is one version of sort of connecting to God, which ultimately the philosophers have managed to comprehend. And there's also God's will, which in Judaism we believe comes through prophecy, which is like another route to that. And here we're being asked to orient our will towards God's will and our actions towards his actions. So there could be this mirror image going on where seemingly once you have the right frequency on, you'll be able to then start talking to other people that have been having that frequency as well. Like, there's that experiment with like, you hitting like a music, like a toner and having that frequency shake. Basically, when it hits the same frequency as like this egg that's not touching it, it starts shaking as well. Because once those frequencies meet, then you can start having a dialogue. So this is an invitation really to have a dialogue with God. There's interpretations that this obviously means less your will, and that your will not being just like, having good deeds and being moral, but more like the specific commandments that God requires from you, which would be sort of a sort of straightforward way of understanding this. There's doing God's will, like we learn, b'chol drachecha da'eu, in all your ways you should recognize God, you should know God. So it really has to do with, like we were saying, the study of Torah together fused with derech eretz, with living in the world and being part of the community. So this too, whether you're waking up in the morning or mowing your lawn or brushing your teeth, in all those aspects, you could still be recognizing God and seeing God and connecting towards his will.
Yeah. This is the part, one of the parts that kind of reminds me also of when I was reading Tao Te Ching. This is the most kind of like,
right,
those trade-offs, those those dichotomies of going back, just in terms of the prose itself, the poetry of the verses themselves, of how there's an interplay of here specifically also, but kind of like the space, right, the emptiness and fulfillment.
Well, definitely when we get to, as we say, I'm just gonna is it you have it on the English screen as well, so that he should make your will as well. Nullify yourself, right? Bitul, really, which I earlier on I said that Hillel does make sort of a switch, even though this is not Hillel speaking over here, this is his descendant, but the Jewish tradition is aware of what's going on in the East, basically, to a certain extent, even though the Pirkei Avot and while there's theological cross-pollination, I'm not saying these texts were necessarily shared, but I don't think the nullify here that we're talking about over here is completely getting rid of you. It's really more of a curbing those desires that you want to do, or the evil inclination, sort of, to speak. So when we want to nullify ourselves and before his will, so that he should nullify the will of others before your will. So this could get a little complicated. Like, is God now, because you are nullifying yourself, God is now going to be nullifying other people? That sort of sounds a little intense. The general interpretation of this would be that first, you are accepting sort of the yoke of God on over you. Basically, you're accepting that there's going to be things that, even though you want them, you are going to restrain yourself and refrain from doing. While by doing that, God will repay you. That by refraining yourself from doing these other things, no damage will come to you, basically, as in, even in the short term, it's a loss, there'll be a long-term gain. And ultimately, as far as nullifying the will of others, that is in the context of the will of others that want ill will of you, right? It's not that you are now, God is giving you the power to hypnotize people and have them do what you want, rather that people that have that desire for ill will towards you will ultimately find a different light or see you in a different light. So that would be like sort of the general translation, even though it could be confusing in seeing over here that he will nullify the will of others before your will. But,
yeah, in the somewhere in the evening prayer, or maybe it's the Shema, before the bedtime Shema. There is it talks in different places. It talks about nullify, or like nullify the wills of my enemies. I'm trying to think about the exact verse that it says there.
Well, you have, like you said, in many different places, you have that, first of all, keep me distant and keep me away from a bad neighbor and a bad friend, and make sure that the people that are thinking bad things about me, make their thoughts be nullified, and anyone that's jealous about me, make them not think about me at all, basically. Have me disappear from their consciousness completely. So ultimately, this relates to the concept that there's a lot of communal living. And that's very understood. And we really need to make sure, and by we, I mean, not we, I'm no sage, but the sages want to make sure that you recognize that you are, and we'll see this later on, I'm sure, that you are not living on an island. And you need to be aware of what's sort of going on around you and the people around you. So this is always in context of, there are going to be people that are talking smack about you behind your back. Yeah. Right? And we see this, and this is a continuation of what we're seeing in the text itself, because we switch now to Hillel. In generally speaking, why we're jumping to Hillel over here, because up until now we opened up like a parentheses over here, and we stuffed inside all the things that were said by Hillel's descendants. We're closing that bracket. Now we're going back towards like Hillel speaking, basically. So we had Hillel, we opened up his descendants, we're closing that up, and we're going back to Hillel speaking. So Hillel says, right? That you should, scroll down in English. Hill would say, do not separate yourself from the community. Do not believe in yourself until the day you die. Okay, so it's obviously, as an individual, it's easier for you to sort of change your ways and change yourself. Obviously, there's a science of sociology where we look at trends and we see how whole communities sort of can move, and we could sort of make sort of anticipations, projections with regards to a community. But if you remove yourself from their community, you're sort of putting yourself in a certain way into the unknown. It's going to be very hard to predict how you're going to behave and how you're going to act. And they're saying that's not a good place for you to be. There's an idea that Tzibur is sort of an acronym of Tzadik Bet Reish, which is Tzadik Benoni Rasha. But you could also look at it like opposite, like Rovetz, which is, what if you're in a place where it's Rasha Benoni Tzadik? Like if you're in a place where like there isn't this hierarchy of that the righteous are on top and the evil are on the bottom, but what if you're in a place where there's the evil on top and the righteous are on the bottom? Should you, in that case, yes, leave the community. Yes, remove yourself from the community. Like if you remember, we spoke about as individuals, what happens if there's a bad neighbor? Should you remove yourself or not? So the reason they reverse this tzibur to Rovetz and they connect it to the verse of V'ra'ita et shar achicha Rovetz azor ta'azorimo. You saw your fellow man and his donkey couldn't handle the weight of his load. You need to go help him. And the attitude here is, even if it's in a city that is an evil city right now, you should recognize that that city is in need of redemption and is in need of help. And you shouldn't run away from the city, even in that case. So again, there's the level of, it's a fine city, but you just want to be an introvert and you want to sort of back up. So that's not healthy. And even if you would think that we're talking about a case where it's an evil city and you're sort of fleeing, the attitude is, unless it's like not like life-threatening or completely detrimental to you, even in that case, you should try to remain as part of the community.
Yeah. And does that, and I assume that is related to, right, do not believe yourself until the day you die, because also in Hebrew, I mean, the punctuation is a little different. There's a comma instead of a period, and in English here, at least, there's a period. But yeah, it's like, do not, so it says do not separate yourself from a community, and then there's something about Do not trust yourself until the day you die. So what?
Well,
Is already
don't
kind of
trust
like
yourself. So I think that's a very good point, because if you're alone, it's very difficult. I mean, we're all having a great time if we have those 24 hours for ourselves and we have time to think, or we went into the man cave to do our work. But ultimately, you cannot course correct if you're alone, right? If you're speaking out to the void, there's no one to speak back at you. It's very hard to course correct, and you shouldn't then be so sure of yourself when you're like, even if you're alone, then you should definitely not be so sure of yourself, because there's no one there to give you that course correction, even till the day you die. That would only be the time, because that would be the only certain thing happening around you when there's no one else around you.
Right. That's what he said before. But Shani lets me money.
Exactly.
I'm to myself.
You also, this reminds me, and again, because we're streaming on Jacob's channel, anything we say over here is not pro-Zionism per se, and we hope that God will redeem all who are mistaken. But Rabbi Cook was in the early years of Israel. There, when it was the Day of Independence Day, the crowds would go out to the streets. Like the people, which weren't so many, lived in Israel, would go out to the streets and dance. It was a very joyous occasion. And the rabbi says that he went out to look at the crowd, and it was the boys and the girls dancing. And the terminology there is really commenting about that. It was co-ed mixed dancing that, generally speaking, in traditional religious context is forbidden. But there was this co-ed dancing, and he said that he was upset that he didn't see any of the rabbis there, basically, and he saw that as being part of lifrosh min hatzibur, is removing yourself from the community. And I think it's also like a deep space of you would think the rabbi would be like, well, of course I'm not there, because there's I'm at Sodom and Gomorrah as far as I'm concerned, right? There's this co-ed dancing. But the idea is very much as Ren tells us in Footloose to his I don't know if it's his father-in-law, his girlfriend's dad, right? That they got to dance, and he uses the Bible, and he says David was dancing in front. So there's a sense of when there's that purest, joyous celebration that is pure, that even the righteous sages should see themselves as part of the community, and even more so because the righteous should recognize, and as we learned it before, we want the sort of the layman or the wicked to stick and stay close to the righteous, because the righteous will affect them, will be a good influence on them. So we're not worried about the righteous necessarily being influenced by the co-ed dancing, so to speak. However, you could imagine that if the sages came and recognized that and joined together with that those festivities, the whole festivity itself would have been lifted and elevated. And that's how potentially you create those connections. But that was just a little note about, not removing yourself from the community, a little anecdote. So back to do not believe in yourself until the day you die, right? So obviously we know that there's people that change. People change their ways all the time, and it's just a general understanding that don't assume that even if you're Mr. Nice Guy, you can't become a jerk, or that. At the end of the day, we saw Steve Jobs turning from someone that people thought was hell to work with to the guru in the turtleneck that people saw as a spiritual guru. So people change their ways, and the Torah is telling you the Mishnah is telling you to be very, very aware of that as well. Also, in general, again, this has to do with removing yourself from the community. When you are removed from the community and there's no course correction, it's also very hard to sort of stay stable. The community, while it's not eternal, it's a lot more stable. So again, it's referencing, like you mentioned, if once you remove yourself from the community, it's very, very difficult to keep that stability.
Yeah, it's funny. It reminds me, so I live in Memphis, and there's a lot of blackouts around. There's a lot of rain here, a lot of storms. And yeah, if you live in one of the suburbs of Memphis, it's like there's always, obviously it's just a general state of the place, but also just like if you live more in the suburbs, it's just you're more likely to have blackouts, and it's going to take more time for that to get fixed, because you're further away from the center, from the city, where the crews are at, where the plants are at, so where the source of the energy is at. So yeah, so it's kind of like,
I like that analogy. That's a good analogy, right? As you move further and further away from the circle, right? Like if it's very difficult to get the same level of service, so to speak. I'm just trying to think of like someone famous that obviously changed, was very sure in his ways, but let's say King Solomon would be very famous, right? Like he thought that he could handle, right? We know that the king can't have many horses and can't have many women, and but King Solomon decided that he could pull this off, right? He's the one guy that could create this equilibrium, so to speak, and he fails, right? There's idol worshippers brought into the temple. Now, again, in King Solomon's behalf, he, I believe, was way ahead of his time and recognized that ultimately, even my Egyptian wife who's bringing in those statues, that's an abstract idea that behind that is the one true God. So he was already trying to move towards a more universal sort of conversation again, but perhaps a little too much, a little too soon. But that's a good example of someone that might have believed in himself a little too much in that circumstance. Okay. ואל תדין את חברך עד שתגיע למקומו. Okay. Do not service of the community. Do not judge your fellow until you have stood in his place. Okay, so this is, in a sense, an echo of the Havei Dan Kol Adav L'Kam Zchut, right? You should judge every person by by his best deeds and those merits, and not assume the worst. But here it's saying it's not saying don't assume the worst, rather put yourself in their position. So first of all, ladun, who are we talking about over here? When it says do not judge, and in Hebrew ladun, we're talking about the dayan, right? We're talking about, you're in the case right now where you're in front of the judge. And the judge right now is looking and deciding right now, how am I supposed to decide about what am I supposed to do in this position? Because we could get to the justice that we have inside our system, but that's not subjective, ultimate justice or truth. Like an extreme example would be the guy is, we're in court right now, and I'm saying Ben stole my bread, right? And there are witnesses that see that you took the bread, and I have a receipt that it's my bread, right? So the judge is going to be like, listen, obviously, the bread is Chezi's. Now, we don't know that I brought the bread because I'm very wealthy and I know you're very poor, and I wanted to have the bread just to make you jealous, and I was about to throw the bread into the gutter, and you have kids to feed, and you're like, in this case, I'm just going to dive and grab this bread because there's no version where I'm not going to let my kids starve, right? Did you still steal that bread? Yes, legally, you still stole that bread. However, the court system, the judge, is supposed to make a decision in this case, right? However, it's going back to saying, but how is the judge making this? How can the judge decide based on what, if I was there, if I could ever be in your shoes? I can never actually be in this position. It's sort of like a paradoxical what they're offering over here. So there's a take that we're not talking about the judges, because the judges ultimately, they need to make a justice call. They're not here to make charity, right? You could come and say that the judges are going to come and say the bread needs to go to Chezi. And at the same time, they're going to look at the community leaders and be like, someone has to take care of Ben right now, because Ben is clearly not doing well. That doesn't mean like we assume Ben is evil right now, but justice still has to done. We're still part of a system, and we can't assume we're in someone else's place, and we don't have a system that could get to that ultimate truth, which is sort of hinted to in the name. Ad shetagia limkomo. Limkomo is more than just like obviously you should try to put yourself in his shoes and his circumstances, but because we can't do that, what is another way of looking and interpreting in its place? Mimkomo is another name we have for God, for God's presence. And the one time God is judging us sort of like on the main day of judgment, right, is Rosh Hashanah, the day of judgment, where in theory the clock gets turned back to zero. We go back to 0 hour, and God allows himself to judge us in that case. But it's sort of giving a backhand over here saying you should always judge people favorably, but really because you can never put yourself in that position. And because we have systems that we can't read minds. That being said, like AI is actually doing crazy stuff with that regard. But up until now, we can't read minds, and therefore we're going to have a system. But we need to realize that the only person that could actually judge in that way is going to be God, right, in that place. But we should always try to put ourselves in that person's shoes.
Right. Yeah. So there are two, I mean, maybe more, but like these two levels of justice. I mean, like you said, the court has this, what can be perceived as a dry, it's the best proxy we have for, like, we have specific criteria for how we adjudicate, right? Like the two witnesses, and also, I mean, right, there's the principle that kind of is echoed in what you said about do not favor the rich, do not favor the poor as well. So, right.
I mean, there's right hand and there's left hand, and ultimately the left hand has to cut. There needs to be a decision made over here. And that's why we were in the last missions, we were talking about, like, there's a difference between like justice and truth. And then there's like truth there's shalom, right? Which is like certain, like a higher level of which creating like this, this sequence that we can't necessarily get to in truth when we're looking at it like with our human eyes, or how we logically look at these things. I mean, a way this is illustrated is with, like, there's a famous story of the Baba Sali. The Baba Sali was a rabbi, Israel Abu Chatzira, part of the Abu Chatzira lineage, dynasty, and they were known as great rabbis and Kabbalists, or Anshe Otot, the miracle workers, so to speak. But he also, in his large estate, he had a school, and he also had his Beis Din, his legal system, his courthouse was there as well. And there was this poor man. There was this man that took a loan from this very wealthy individual, and he didn't have money to pay him back. And the wealthy individual wasn't backing down, and the community was talking to him, but he didn't back down. Mm-hmm. So the Baba Sali ultimately decided that, yes, I need to go according to justice, right? Which is like, you get your money. But while he was writing the verdict, I think it was either every verse or every word, he would break down crying, saying like how horrible this is that we're in this position. And that amount of, like, that was too intense for this wealthy individual sort of to bear. And he said, like, forget giving me the money, like, it's too much for me to handle. But that would be a case in theory where it shows there a judge is saying, this is the system I'm bound by, but these are not, I could see that this system is incomplete. And that's why, like, the morals of this, I'm still trying to, exemplify and embody by crying, by writing this verdict, because how sad I see this. And then you would expect the community to raise up and, sort of raise the whole community up to another bar, to another level.
Right. I think that's kind of like might be a stretch, but I feel like that's when you hear like a boycotts or people, that is kind of like a tool that the community, whether that's done appropriately or not, is trying to correct, or in addition to the justice meted out, whether it's fair or not, by the general justice system. There are people that are trying to also do that, right? So do those boycotts, like I can see with that wealthy person, right? Even if that verdict was set, the people, then everybody else in the community were like, we don't want to get any loans from that person because we can see what ends up occurring, right? I mean, and that's a second set of judgment.
So this, excuse me, this of course relates to the ideas of the Shemitah year, or that like all the, all interests are void and all loans go after 7 years. And we talk about like this utopian potentially quasi-socialist reality that the Bible talks about. But again, this is in a certain way like an ideal. Like if we want to step up to the plate and be those people, if we want to live in a community where the wealthy feel naturally, they're like, yeah, it's all good. You don't have to pay us back right now. And they don't feel pressure from the community, from the rabbis to come and say, let's say from the poor to be like, well, give us, right? We were talking about how last week, how today you have this issue in Israel where you have a lot of people that are only studying and are not participating in, let's say, these Israel economy or integrated within the social circles in a way where they're really being a certain drag on the country. And we see that the other rabbis traditionally were carpenters, they were blacksmiths, they were working the whole time, and they were poor. And it wasn't that there were poor sages and there were wealthy sages. And it wasn't that people weren't sensitive or just people didn't necessarily demand or want so much as well. Right. So you could find this balance where the rich feels like, of course, he sees like this injustice happening. That doesn't mean everyone needs to have a Bugatti because I could afford buying for everyone a Bugatti. And with regards to what you're saying, it's why it's sad, because ultimately we're all justice warriors, right? Like they co-opted like a great term over there when they took like justice warriors. We all want to be justice warriors. However, there's a difference between us all recognizing they're like, oh, wow, intersectionality. I'm going to take like the few good things about this concept and recognize that like, oh, we should always be learning more, to the extreme of that being like, people being asked to kneel and to the height of like the Black Lives Matter protests where people were being sort of like called out in restaurants and like, white people needed to apologize. Right. So obviously that would be like an extreme of where you're taking what kind of pressure you're asking the community to have on someone.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I want to just say like nidui or cherem, right? Excommunication is different, I believe, is different than canceling. Canceling, I think that's because we're not talking to you right now. I'm not removing you from things necessarily. I'm not like removing you from the platform. We are removing ourselves from you in a certain sense, even if sometimes you're asked to leave the community, right? It's not that like reality change. It's like your behavior needed to move X. But in the canceling mode, it's sort of like you keep on moving the goal line. And if I didn't keep up, now I'm like out, right? So like I'm saying, you keep on creating like this new standard where you're expecting people all to like assume this is the new standard we're part of. But that's obviously not the reality in a proper fixed society. All right, let's move on. Do not say something that is not readily understood in the belief that it will ultimately be understood. Or, I love that they're giving you already the interpretation of here. Do not say something that ought not be heard, even in the strictest confidence, for ultimately it will be heard. So this is like, it's thousands of years ago, but they knew then to clear your search history. I mean, they knew ultimately these things come out, and we're living in a world today where I mentioned this in the past, I think, Ben, that like you could see this gap between you still have boomers that are in a position of power who still think that like, well, I said it behind this closed door, so there's nowhere someone's going to know. And then at the same time, you have this social media world that says like, we have every single document and we took it and we looked at it and we saw it in the cameras and they saw it, we know in this angle. So we're in this like really little crazy world right now. But right. So first of all, like we said, don't assume people can't hear you because these things are ultimately under being exposed. And I always tell this to my nieces and nephews that, when someone tells you a secret and they tell you not to tell everyone, and then you tell that one friend, listen, you can't tell anyone. I'm like, that friend also has one friend that they're also going to tell, that won't tell anyone. I'm like, and that's why we'll always go out there. It starts with you. Keep your trap closed, right? But so this language is giving, and again, this is all part of community, right? We'll go back all to one of those first Mishnayot we read, right? I opened up my house and everyone's coming inside. The assumption is you're going to be talking, right? And we already said, like, don't just be having a conversation with your your friend's wife, but even if you then talk with your other friends, also, the things you tell him about your friend's wife will ultimately be heard as well. So you have to be obviously quiet about that. Maimonides interprets the way it's also interpreted over here, which is don't say something that people are not going to comprehend. Even if down the line you assume like, okay, in a few more generations they're going to know what I was talking about. The attitude is like, because until people become quote unquote woke enough to understand what you were talking about, or enlightened enough to know what you're talking about, it could create a lot of damage. And this again has to be chachamim hizaru b'divrachem, right? We should be very careful with the words you use and how you speak, because they could be misconstrued, they could be taken out of context, and definitely if you already know them to be confusing, you're just opening up Pandora's box, right? Like, I don't think in Jordan Peterson's like heyday with his blitz of interviews, let's say with the crescendo being, let's say, the Kathy Newman interview, I don't think per se he was saying things that are super complicated, but he was definitely there to explain every single thing, right? So like, and you could see everything he was saying was being misconstrued, or like, is that what you're saying? Are you saying women need to be murdered? Like, no, that's not what I said. So he had to be very, very careful with that, obviously. So he was careful with this one. I guess he must have read Pirkei Avot. There is another interpretation, which is like the opposite, which is don't assume people are not going to understand what you're going to say, and you should say it, as in don't hold back from saying something, fearing like this is already too high level and like I can't get into this. Like no, like force yourself to educate, explain it to them, be there, be present, be the educator, and people will gain from this. So it's really like the reverse of what Maimonides is saying, but it's sort of more from like the eye of the beholder. If you are, and we'll get to that also, I believe later on with regards to being shy, but if it's a confidence issue, then you should step up to the plate. If you're overconfident, thinking like people are not going to understand me because I know this is so complicated, then maybe don't go out dropping bombs that no one's going to be able to comprehend.
Yeah. I listened actually this week or last week. I was listening to Rabbi Sachs, the podcast that he has about the parasha, and he talks about Shema, which is the verb that we have here, like do not say, or it will translate to many things. But one of the translations that he gave is also obey. So if I'm trying to think about, right, it says like do not say things that you don't think are going to be obeyed, but that will end up being obeyed. So I feel like you can also read it like that. Like if you are some kind of leader or something, and you think, okay, I'm going to say something outrageous, but people are probably not going to, probably not going to do it. It's not going to get there. I'm just going to say it to you because it's going to get me the vote or something like that. And then it ends up that these things, like people will do what you say, which is dangerous, right? Because if you
so let's say, let's use an example. Donald Trump saying like, I don't know, January 6th, maybe you guys should be hanging out over there. And next thing you know, like people are like, oh, well, I guess you mean like storm the Capitol.
Right. So there's something, if you hinted something, you know what the probability, like in the back of your head, okay, if I say this, the probability that it will be misconstrued to do A, and you end up saying it with that risk in mind, then you might be judged, right? So,
I mean, there's a conversation online a lot of times, like in the podcast community or space, with regards to, right, am I responsible for what I say, right? Like I have millions of viewers. How can I be responsible for what I say? The Mishnah's attitude is you're damn right you're responsible for what you say. You should be extremely careful about what you say. And there's now a separate question again, like going back to that justice and charity. Like maybe legally you're safe, but you hold like, I mean, I don't know. Do you know Patrick Ben David?
Patrick Ben David.
This guy has like valuetainment podcast. He talks a lot about this Iranian guy that moved to America, and he has this insurance company. Either way, he was schmoozing with Joe Rogan, and he was telling Joe that, like, you're basically the GOAT, you're the guy, you're the this, you're the that, and how about how interviewing Trump. And you have to think about that, like the sense of responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
You have 11 million listeners to him weekly, I believe, which I think dwarfs all legacy media combined.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And I mean, for us to say, like, no, he's just like a joker, he's just like a comedian, it doesn't matter what he says. That is, and that doesn't mean people don't have responsibility in being in doing their own due diligence. But you also have to be aware of the community that's listening to you and the people that are out there in the world. So one has to be, and we could see here 2,000 years ago, the mission is telling you, be extremely, extremely careful about these things. And when you have an attitude, when the podcast starts, like it's 3 hours, like take a joint, don't worry. Think of Elon Musk, right? Smoking that joint. And he's saying like, and then think of what we just said here, that the things that you say, right? Don't assume no one's gonna hear what you said. Someone's gonna hear what you said, right? So, Elon, you got a little too comfortable. You understand all your shareholders just saw you smoking a blunt. So your stock shares just dropped. And maybe like Kenny, that like it was a big deal that he had Tesla shares. Right. And that was like the plan right now he was promising for his this kid and that kid. And he just worked on his marriage. And now he finally got it all in order. And now all that money's gone. And now that guy's like messed over. So like people need to take these things into consideration, obviously. Okay. And we end with Al Tomal Im Lo Achshav Ematai, basically. Al Tomal Lek Shefne Shaneh Shema Lo Tifne. And do not say, when I am free myself from concerns, I will study, for perhaps you will never free yourself. First of all, which is a little different from Lo Achshav Ematai, like if not now, when, right? Because like there's always this now. And if you're doing it, we said this last time, if I'm taking an advance from the now and the future, like I'm always going to be following up, trying to get that next now, that next time that was allotted for that purpose. I've used it basically. And this, the way it's interpreted also here, when I free myself from concerns, where we're talking about nullifying your will and removing yourself from the community and then not believing in yourself and all these things. So then it says like, okay, so I'm half the time, am I part of the community? Am I not part of the community? Who am I? Am I God? I can't judge this person because I first have to get to his position, right? So there are always going to be these concerns around. So now you need to then lock in and start learning. You got to get on that train because you're never going to be able to free yourself from this sort of existential thought process. You got to be part of the system, which gives you framing for that, basically.
Yeah.
Very much, someone dealing here with the meaning crisis here, and we tell ourselves like, no, study, engage.
Mm-hmm.
I believe we're going to the next one.
Yeah.
I'm scrolling down. Hu haya omer. Who is, we're going back to Hillel, back to our boy. Ein bor bur yurechet, velo am haaretz chasid, velo habayshan lamed, velo hakapdan melamed, velo kol hamarbe beschora machkim, ובמקום שאין אנשים, השתדל להיות ish. He would also say, a boor, I know that was in English, that's a word in English, or are they just saying a translation in English to the word in Hebrew, cannot be sin-fearing. An ignoramus cannot be pious. A bashful one cannot learn. A short-tempered person cannot teach. Nor does anyone who does much business grow wise. In a place where there is no man, strive to be a man. All right. So what do we have going on over here? Ein bur yurechet. So a bore is like a hole, sort of like it can be looked as a field that is not maintained, right? So nothing grows out of it. Mm-hmm. Or it can be looked as a well that is there's no water in it, or there's no live water in it. It's only like it's full up to a certain amount, and that's all there is over there. There's no new fresh water making its way inside there as well. And in these cases, you can't be fear God. You can't be God-fearing if you don't know anything. As in, if you have a well that is not constantly growing, if you have a field that is not being maintained, then ultimately you can't fear God, because if you're not knowledgeable, if you're not aware of what's around you, if you're assuming that like this one well that you have that's full is going to be enough to sustain you, then you're mistaken. And if you're that far mistaken, then clearly you're in a space when you're not being God-fearing. That doesn't mean that this is someone that's poor, that doesn't have a lot, right? It just means someone that's not investing in himself, is not investing in knowing more, in trying to expand his horizons. If you recall, I mentioned last week that Rabbi Cook comes and says, the simpleton that has a simple belief in God, it's sort of okay for him to stick in his lane. But the wise man can't assume that he's great in medicine and he's great in science, but when it comes to theology and religion, I'm just going to keep my head down and I'm not going to dig deep. And more than that, one should risk himself even going through the routes or the levels of heresy, so long that he could come out on the other side really searching and trying to expand his horizon and his knowledge, ultimately knowledge of God, and then being God-fearing as well. There's also the fact that, which is yirechet, you when it says fear over here, it's not you are fear, like this fear of God of, something bad is going to happen to me. Rather, it's a fear that comes out of love, yirechet, which is I love you so much that if I fear disappointing you. I think is a better way of looking at it than the fearing of quote unquote the angry father, and more about fearing that you're disappointing your father, not because he's going to yell at you, just because how much you love him.
Yeah,
exactly, about the misstep. Obviously, this is in also the rubric. The framing I'm doing right now is that's Maimonides' framings of the knowledge of God is the love of God, and one should do his best to learn more and understand more, and hence also all this little corner is very much in that sense, us learning more about ourselves, about each other, about recognizing ourselves in the other, and by that way expanding our knowledge of God. Velo ha'am haaretz chasid, and the ignoramus cannot be pious. So we should also say, what is an am haaretz? Because here it says ignoramus. So there's different ways of looking at this interpretation. Some in the Bible we have am haaretz being as seen as the people living in the land. We see that in Ezekiel, and there is in Ezra. He's talking about the am haaretz, about people that are non-Jews, people living in the land but that are not Jews, or people called them haaretz. There's also am haaretz, which is ignoramus. However, what I usually hear about am haaretz is it's actually a man that knows a tremendous amount. Someone that is very, very, very learned. However, lo shimesh talmidei chachamim. He did not stick to or connect to a rabbi, and that's why while he is very book smart, so to speak, he doesn't know what to do with that information. He hasn't cross-examined it. He hasn't seen how his rabbi takes this idea and how does he actualize it in the world, right? How do I take it?
That's kind of like the autodidact criticism, right? Where you can know all this stuff, but you don't know how to put it in a way to make it practical in the real world, or it's more difficult because it's part of being being with experts or people with knowledge closely is that you can actually see how they're applying things and be in that environment. I mean, that's definitely I can personally attest to.
Very much agreed. And so think about Rav Mitnitu, or Yehuda Leon Ashkenazi, there was this student that really wanted to learn with him. And he was very busy. I don't have time to learn with you. And he's like, I really want to learn with you. And eventually he's like, okay, come, let's sit down and talk. And he's like, okay, what are you learning in yeshiva? What are you learning in your study hall right now? He said I'm learning Bava Kama. So he's like, why are you learning Bava Kama? Do you want to be like a dayan? Do you want to be like a judge? And that question sort of throws traditional thinking on its head. Like, well, I'm learning this because like we learn the Talmud. That's what we do. And his answer was like, well, that's a very practical tractate. And it's like, is that your goal right now? Like, ultimately, he told this person also to become a rabbi. So it's not like he's saying I'm against like the traditional mode of like learning this and becoming a rabbi, but more there's different perspectives of how you even want to be engaging the Torah itself. Don't assume that you're engaging it this way. Now, this guy could have been a brilliant student, but I could sometimes hear on Jacob's channel, someone will come and ask a specific question about, let's say, Judaism. And he's saying like, oh, but I heard that this rabbi said 1, 2, 3. Yes, that's true. But now if you had a rabbi that was actually guiding you, you'd see that like that's what it says over here, but this is how we interpret this way, which is why we use the word chassid. A chassid, the pious man, takes on to himself, there's what is the Torah commands of me, and then there's my interpretations of how that's actually manifest, and many times we see that being as above and beyond. This goes in a very small tangent, connects to things that I'm discussing with Yosef Razin and people on the Discord with regards to could the Essenes be identified as the Hasidim that are inside the Gemara, and the Essenes and the Hasidim both did above and beyond what was required from them with regards to, let's say, the classic biblical requirements and even the rabbis' requirements at the time. So hence we're also using the term Hasid over here, which is it's not enough for you to be an Am Haaretz where you even know a tremendous amount. It's do you know how to apply it? And to know how to apply it, that means you need to be around rabbis. And to be around rabbis or different perspectives, that goes all the way back to Enli freshman at Tzibur. You can't do that alone. You can't course correct. You got to be part of the community to even be engaging in this kind of in this kind of conversation. And obviously we'll continue going on with this because we hit this at the end when we see in a place where there's no man starts to be a man, but we'll get there soon enough. Okay, and then we have Velo habayshan lamid. A bashful one cannot learn. Okay, so there's a difference also. You know, you must study if you want to be very learned, and there's a difference also between like you need to be humble, not shy. It's okay for you to be like, I need to know my place, and rather than be like, I'm too shy to do this. People are going to be talking about me. People are going to be laughing at me if I engage in this way. Busha, in general, the word busha is in certain ways also connected all the way to like the first sin with Adam. Up until the first sin, Ve'yu arumim ve'itbosheshu, I believe, something like that, which is they were naked, they didn't know they were naked, and they didn't have the sense of being embarrassed. But after the first sin, after you recognize that we can no longer reach the mark, there's a sense of embarrassment that we have. And we've mentioned this in the past, that like we're told that the Israelites are Rachmanim, Gomei Chasadim, and Baishanim. And there's a sense of like, it's a problem to be, it's not good to be shy. And we have this in ourselves. You could connect it, back to Adam, sort of like original sin, that like we're always constantly thinking that we're going to miss the mark in a certain aspect. However, there's another way of looking at it, which is the nation of Israel, seemingly in our tradition, is the only nation that is selected and created artificially, right? So, wow, Yosef, big stuff over here.
My name.
Okay, so I was mentioning that the Lo habayshan lamed, and how in our tradition, Jewish tradition, Israel is the only nation that is created artificially, right? You have Egypt, you have the other countries that are sort of part of history that are happening by themselves, and you have this nation of Israel that is selected. And internally, the Jewish people, the Israelites or the Hebrews, are constantly sort of dealing with this tension of like, if we were selected artificially, are we in question? Do we really have a right to be what we say we are? If this is sort of, we're picked out taken out of the Bible or taken out of history and were elevated in this certain extent. And I think you could even see this tension with Abraham. And because God tells him, Lech lecha, go. And then he says, and the idea is that you should go by yourself. And Abraham goes by himself. Lot goes with him, but that's just, Lot could follow him. That's not a problem. And then the next verse, he goes back and brings his family. And there's a sense over there, which is like, yeah, I'm doing what God wants me to do, which is like the solo mission, but I'm also taking this family with me. And then again, God tells him, I'm going to make a great nation out of you, right? Nothing's happening. It's not working out. He goes to Hagar. His wife says, maybe we'll be more successful this route. He has a child. Now we know Hagar, according to some of the interpretations of the sages, some sages say that she is the daughter of Pharaoh. And here again, this is supposed to be, at least in Abraham's eyes, God wanted me to become this, turn into this great nation, be a father among great nations. I have a chance right now of creating this universal bond between me and God, who God just chose me, and the universal people, right? The Egyptian right now, these are the head honchos in the culture, and we're going to do this. Now God comes and tells him, no, that's not what I'm doing. I'm being specific. It's not going to be from him. And Abraham gives him pushback. He's like, no, maybe we could just keep it like this. So I think there is that, even that tension over there, which is, and I think we have it until today. And again, I'm sorry, Jacob, for saying this, but even with the Zionistic project, Italy doesn't wake up in the morning and say, do we have the right to exist? Yet Israel is always in this conflict of do we have a right to be here? Why are we here? And this question, I think, still relates to us being shy or bashful. And I think that's why also here we're looking at this as lo habayshan lamed. Being shy is not a great trait. It connects also to bisha in Aramaic, which is something bad, which is not esek bish. It's not a good, so there's a linguistic interpretation here as well. But Yosef, I see your eyes squinting. You could say you disagree with all of this. It's a safe space.
Maybe. I'm also dealing with the couple-minute lag between YouTube and StreamYard. I'm still trying to, bridge the gap that I missed. I'm not sure. I mean, I originally was going to come in on the Chassid part, but you already went beyond it.
You can go back.
I think a lot of these are pushed. I think they're all kind of pointing to the same thing in many ways. I don't think these are necessarily independent statements, and therefore, I think totally. I want to integrate how I treat them a little bit more.
Sure.
And I think all of them, in some, I mean, especially by Shen, but they're all kind of going to get to the last statement there, in a place where there's no one, driving. I can't.
There's no
not going to read text off the screen, but there's no man. Then you have to strive to be a man. It's not that you have to be a man. You strive to be a man, right? Shut down. But it's right. These are all different. They're all very different attitudes. I was going to say on the Chassid and on the Amaretz, I read that very differently. I think so. I'm okay with the Essenes, Chassid. I don't necessarily know if we have to go into that, say it's Essenes, but people really care about purity.
A little side thing,
right? The Amaretz is someone who doesn't care about purity laws, and I mean, in the sense of maybe, right? And the Chassid is someone who really cares about purity laws. But I think a lot of this gets into these mentality issues, right? All of these are mentality. And it's not necessarily embarrassed in an emotional reaction way as much as this mentality, right? So going back to the first one, right? You have actually the field versus the well is actually a pretty big difference, because the field that isn't maintained is a matter of, are we saying you need discipline, or is it a bore? Is it a well? It's not being filled. And you don't have the motivation, right? It's there's a big difference in how we understand the bore. You said.
Well, like you said, it's both.
Hope they don't lose you. But yeah, as we go through these, right, the Vaishan isn't necessarily. Because we also talk about the Vaish as being an important characteristic of the Jewish people, right? It's another sugya in the Talmud where it's actually very important that we're Vaishanim. So there's this weird balance here between Now, this could just be a disagreement, could be a machloket, but I don't know that it necessarily is. But I think there is this kind of tension on do you have the, and it's interesting. It's not the confidence to be the man and be the teacher, right? You'd have thought the kapdan, you'd have thought these would be flipped actually, in some ways. The fact that it's the baishan who can't learn, as opposed to the baishan who can't teach or can't lead, I think is something that we really should think about. That someone who, they pull back basically, and they're not willing to engage in the experience. Right? They're afraid of the experience. They're worried that they don't have what to contribute to the experience of learning. Is unable ultimately to learn. Which, right? I think it's a little bit different.
It's in the context of, and we didn't get there yet, but ena kabdan lamed. So the kabdan, kipid is like in Aramaic, it means like also like angry, but like it could be someone that's mad. It could also be someone that is like, here it says short tempered they have over here, or it could be someone that is like extremely anal or very specific or very procedural with regards to the way he teaches. And what Yosef was saying about like weaving these together, also it's like, we'll go back. There's a guy that is not motivated, or let's say, or he's not disciplined. Or there's a guy that's an Amin Aretz, as in he knows a lot, but let's say there's something that he doesn't care, or that some interpretations as that he is book smart, but he doesn't know actually how to actualize a lot of these things, or he doesn't know how to orient these things properly on the ground. Okay, so that person in all those cases, I'm missing discipline. I don't know enough. I think I know enough, but not enough to do it. So he's not going to learn anything if he's going to be shy about those stuff. Like, you need to walk into the classroom and say, like, I want to learn even though I'm not disciplined right now, or I want to learn even though now velo hakabdan melamed. But it's going to be difficult for any one of these three characters to make their way, let's say, into the study hall, right?
To teach.
And there's also
to teach, right?
The ena kabdan, exactly. He doesn't teach. Someone that's going to be very angry at someone that's being shy, that's going to be a fail, right? We know this again, like this again is 2,000 years ago. We know this. We still have to deal with this in classrooms today. Someone that's going to be like, well, no, like, we're already at chapter 3. I'm sorry, little Timmy, but that's where we're going. Like, no, that's not going to work if you're going to be too anal about it, or like, I'm stopping in the middle. I'm stopping you to, like, little Timmy is finally doing it, and he's reading and he's being successful. And she's like, oh, it's the bell. Sorry, stop reading. Like, can't you see that this is his moment? And this is the moment to, like, continue teaching and be with him, and like, and tell him how proud you are that he's doing. So the person that's going to be really very rigid, right? So again, it's either going to be someone that is not patient enough with these people and is going to end up turning into the mad teacher, and that's a bad, or it's going to be someone that is too strict and too procedural, which is going to be too difficult for these outliers, the bashful guy, the Am Aretz that's not actualizing his potential, not becoming the Chassid, or the Boer, right? They're not going to be able to make it inside the fold.
So
Yosef left because he basically agrees with everything I said. That's what I understood from what he was saying. So I'm just...
And he raised a...
sorry, Richard, Richard, you wanted to ask a question?
Yeah. So is this saying you cannot learn if you do not risk being shown your error? Right? There is a sense in which the bashful one doesn't want to be found out. The ignoramus doesn't want to be found out. And the boor kind of hides because he knows he's a boorish person. The person who steps forward, as it were, in faith and is willing to be corrected. Is that something of what you're getting at here?
I mean, definitely. And this relates to... Ben, if you don't mind scrolling up for a second, to here, when we said over here, and do not say, when I free myself of my concerns, I will study, for perhaps you will never free yourself, right? So that's related to that. Like, this guy that we just said has all these existential issues, right? Yeah. The guy that's on his fourth stream of the day, Like, as the kids say today, touch grass. Like, you got to get out there. You got to do it. Like, you're going, like, yeah, you might get allergic. You might get a bee might sting you, or your teacher might get upset. But like, you can't be stuck in this, like, in this paralyzed by fear or anxiety sort of situation. So yes, very much.
So I don't have any knowledge of the Mishnah, but as soon as you started talking, I was immediately reminded of a passage from Job, and also passages from Isaiah. Job, where God addresses himself to Job, and I apologize, I'm using the Christian conventions that I would naturally fall into, so I'm not sure if I'm in the present context.
Both those books are in our Bible, so we're good.
Yes. Yeah, but I don't know if should I be using God?
You're all good. Do your thing.
In this
it's a safe space.
Okay, all right. Where God says, "Stand up and face me like a man."
Yeah.
Right? And I will address you. Or at the beginning of Isaiah, where it says, "Come, let us reason together." Your sins are like scarlet, white as snow. Right? Mm-hmm. There is a sense in which the Holy One of Israel calls you out and calls you to account, and that experience is replicated not just for the great men of faith, but also for each and every reader who comes to the text.
Agreed.
Yeah, I feel like this is right. It's kind of like the. I mean, I liked Yosef's point about the bashfulness, because it shows how it's these two sides of a spectrum that needs to be integrated at the same time, or needs to be integrated in one individual. So when we say do not be shy, we're talking about the particular context within the study hall, where you need to ask questions and you need to be able to, if you have a bad idea, a bad understanding, that somebody answers that and you can improve. But if you think about like the Bilam and his blessing of Israel in the Torah, right? He blesses them for their, I forget the exact quote, but for their doors not being the doors of their tents not being.
That's an interpretation, but what he says is Matovu alecha Yaakov mishkanotecha Yisrael, right? How great are your tents, Jacob? And the interpretation that our sages tell us are that their tents were oriented in such a way that no one was looking into someone else's business. And this also relates to the fact of seeing themselves as a community already, and already done at that level where like they gave themselves each privacy. And what he was mentioning, sorry, I don't want to go ahead. That's no,
I would just say that was perfect. I would just say that could be interpreted as bashfulness, right? They were bashful enough, or they were Baishan, they were, yeah, I mean, in Hebrew, I mean, it sounds right, where they were bashful enough to not have the doors looking at each other, right? So that was a good aspect of that, and that is a good integration of both of those polar opposites. I'm just thinking about the Rambam and how he talks about that golden mean, right? Where you don't want to be at each end.
So I would say that Baishan over here, I think is less. It's there's something to it being again, like there's something being humble, right? And then there's something being like shy, and with being shy, if you go to a place where you are sort of challenging yourself, I've given this an example also about like being that internal Amalek inside of you saying you can't do this, right? Or shooting those arrows towards that couple getting married saying they're never going to make it. There's something about being shy of the reality, saying that you don't really have the right to even exist. And that way you're almost like challenging God in a certain, like, I'm not good enough. I can't do this. Like, who are you to challenge the creator that made you to doubt yourself in such a manner? And then when we say in the morning blessing, Modeh ani lefanecha, right? I see the cosmos, I see the world, I see the Hubble telescope, and I can feel like I am insignificant. I am nothing. I remind myself every morning when I wake up and say, God, I thank thee. And I just like you've created all these things, you've also created the I. And because I recognize myself, I have the confidence to recognize you and thank you, which goes back to what we were saying, have your will match his will and as his will match your will, because I need to recognize myself as his creation. And if I'm shy, if I'm in the shadows, there's a certain sense of me is denying that. And by denying that, I'm in a certain sense denying God.
Yeah.
That's very existential.
It's very existential. Yeah, we go there. We go all over the place over here. Okay, Hala, onwards.
Yes. Is there anything that you want to say about in a place where there are no men strive to be a man, or do we?
Yeah, we're going. I meant onwards, like we're over here. We didn't read this last time. But lo kol hamarbe b'schora machkim. And 1 second, short-tempered. Okay. Nor does anyone who does much business grow wise. So this is, in a certain way, you would think someone who is doing a lot of business, and definitely at that time, going from port to port, seeing the world, seemingly this guy's picking up a lot of skills and a lot of knowledge. So you would think this guy's going to be wise. However, the Mishnah is telling you, don't assume that. Don't assume that the guy that just because he's worldly, he actually knows a lot, right? This is like a jack of all trades, but a master of none. Is this someone that's not actually really full with knowledge? And this is also like, this is in a certain way, a hint or echoing of what we said a few Mishnayot ago about if you are going to be working for the government or you're going to be working for the authorities, right? So you should realize that this is sort of like a decree letting people know, yes, we said it's not all about learning all the time, but it's also about being active in public life. And then we went far enough to saying that, like, you should be very worried about the authorities, but if need be, go and work for the authorities. However, that's not an invitation for everyone to go work for the authorities right now and be traveling on their private jets, because don't assume that's going to make you wise. And by wise as in fill you with Torah. Yes, there's far and few between are the people that need to be doing those missions of being like community leaders. And really, you should be staying close to base and be learning. So there's like a little echoing of like saying, don't assume that it's going to be like this glorious reality. There's also a sense of that you will actually come back wise, but in Hebrew, it's machkim, which is like you could also make other people wise. Not only that you become wise, whether you're at the machkim anashim acherim, you are enlightening other people, which is you might have picked up many skills of knowledge for yourself, but you will not be able to teach that or pass that on, right? It's just going to be like, oh, I had this guy that taught me this great wisdom, but you really had to be there, and that's not helpful for us. So that's
I like the Hebrew how it says, because in the Hebrew it doesn't say literally does much business. It's like accumulates things basically, right?
Well, you could say that he's a hoarder, right? Hamar beschora. You could also say hamar beschora, like in doing dealings. So
dealings. I mean, like you said, wisdom, knowledge. I mean, schora you can mean. I can see how you can interpret it as knowledge too, right? These are things. You can think about them as physical as the skill that you mentioned. I still see it in the way you interpret it, but I just like how you can, you get this image of somebody that just has like a bunch of stuff, but they're not. Yeah, they're just like, they're just things that are like in my container outside here. They're just gonna be boxes on top of boxes on top of boxes. They're not a house with rooms and with like something integrated that you can. That it's more
right. They're all categorized in their own little boxes, and these are not all discs that you're spinning together at the same time, trying to create some sort of harmony. Which, by the way, goes back to this guy that is dealing with all his business. Potentially, is also the guy we recognize as the Amaretz, the ignoramus, which we said wasn't really an ignoramus, but rather someone that is aware of stuff, but doesn't like you're interpreting right now. Business being, I have, again, business is the wrong way. Schora, according to your interpretation, Ben, would be like Moses saying, Lo ish dvarim anochi. I'm not, you could interpret that Moses telling God, I'm not a man of words, right? Like I stutter, I stammer, I can't speak. Or Moses is telling God already then, I'm not a man of physical things. I'm not a man of like, I need the highest car. I'm flipping Moses. Right. So like that's not the kind of thing I'm interested in. And here too, kol hamarbeh b'schora, lo kol hamarbeh b'schora machkim. You could, in theory, gain a tremendous amount of knowledge, and schora being you filled your toolkit with a lot of wealth, of knowledge-based wealth, but that doesn't actually make you wise.
Yeah.
I'm with you. Just gonna pop this on over here. What is this? Is more than way to go to wrong. Being brash and being evasive are both going off the path, just in different directions. 1000% sure. Thank you, Baz, for that beautiful comment. Okay, and ובמקום שאין אנשים, השתדל להיות איש. In a place where there are no men, strive to be a man. And by the way, again, like you mentioned here, there's a period, but in Hebrew, there is a comma, right? This is continuous and not like a brand new line sign. So what are we talking about over here being a man? There's interpretations, which is if you're in a place where no one is moral, be the moral guy. Stand up there and be that guy that speaks out for the few moral people, like we saw with Abraham and Sdom, or be the moral person. You could look at this as a place where there are other people around you, but there are no men. Strive to be a man, which is show confidence, be present. It's less about you saying like, say these two words, but it's don't be the guy that is just like, melting in the side. You've come, you are a man, be an ish. And this is, we're putting aside the brain and the nefesh and what you could do inside. Like we're putting all those things aside. Like the fact that you are a man and being present, like live up to your potential in that sense. Like don't be like a weak individual. There is a place where we say ish, anashim, where it says men in plural is leadership. Where there is no leadership, you strive to be the leader then. And the sages talk about that even if you're not qualified, like that you like if I was going up against like I don't know who a great politician is, but let's say 2008 Obama. If I'm going against 2008 Obama, I no way I have a chance. But if I'm the only guy in town right now, so I gotta be the man. Another interpretation is where there are no men, strive to be a man, as in if you are alone, going back to that place of if you already removed yourself from the community, or you find yourself removed from the community and there are no eyes on you, there are no other men to be found, regardless, conquer your evil inclination and be the man, be the righteous man, even if you're doing this with yourself and no one else is there around to see you.
Yeah, and I mean, like Yosef added, ishtadil, like strive. It might be difficult to do that, to keep, but all you can do is strive towards that.
And that strive goes all the way back to, and the bashful one can't learn, right? Like you have to try.
Right.
You have to you got to remove yourself from that place. You can't be living in those concerns forever. You must try. And like Yosef was saying, the trying would be, right? And like how I interpret also, en bur yireh chet, right? A boar cannot be sin-fearing. And if the boar is like the field, right? So I don't have any discipline. So you have to at least try to do that. Get that inertia going. Okay. Let's continue.
Yep. Good.
All right. This is a strange one, I think. Yeah, I guess we could end it on this one. Af hu ra'a gulgolet achat shetzafa al pnei hamayim. Amar la. Al da'ateft atfuch. Vesof metayapech yutfun. This is in Aramaic. He also saw a skull floating upon the water. Said he to it, because you drowned others, you were drowned. And those who drowned you will themselves be drowned. So he also saw, we're talking about Hillel, right? He's the guy that we also saw. So the way I learned this is let's say what we're talking about over here first, and then we'll put it in some context, at least the context that I was taught. First, it's basically telling us over here the violence, the circle of violence is never ending. Basically, I see a skull in the water, or I roll up to a crime scene, right? or you could see any movie where a detective gets out of his car and he looks at his gray partner and says, "I'm telling you, Joe, this is never going to end," right? He sees like this body on this floor and he says like, "This is Nick Nicholson. He was shot dead, part of a drive-by. But he was one of our suspects for the drive-by last week where killed this guy. And now the ones who killed you, your crew is going to kill them next week. So they're also going to drown." And it's never going to end. This cycle just never ends. There's an interpretation which says also Hillel is sort of speaking, again, whether this to himself and like this is like his own little insight, or he's talking to the people and explaining that ultimately this circle of violence do not interact with it, and don't take the law into your own hand. Well, this only should be happening with the judges, because if you decide now to come in and avenge your brother, right? Even if according to the Bible, right, we have this system, if I kill someone by mistake, we're still going to allow, there's still space. The Torah understands that Joe's brother that you just killed by mistake is beside himself, and he's running after to kill you right now. Right. And we understand why he wants to do that, because you killed his brother. So only if you make it to the sanctuary city are you safe. But up until then, it's sort of like all bets are off. Now, that's why they also have to have signs all over letting people know that, like, this way towards Sanctuary City, to really make sure people can get there quickly.
Yeah.
It's very much like, with the Roadrunner, like you're changing the signs to go the other direction, like back circle. So,
yeah.
So
do you have Levites along the way telling you where to go, or like just like...
Yeah. So Levites actually, so there's the 3 sanctuary cities within, let's say, old school Israel, and there's 3 past the Jordan. And then there's, out of the 48 cities that were given to the Levites, all those cities also acted as sanctuary cities as well. Yeah. So it was significantly more, ultimately speaking. What are they complaining about? So what? People's running after them. You can go anywhere you want. But Hillel's basically telling you, don't get involved with this. Don't get inside this cycle, because you're going to see it's never ending. Also, just in general, you could see like a very violent streak over here, right? About like him saying ultimately the people that are going to drown you, you're going to drown them. You could be like, why are we just not having like some sort of court system over here? Maybe put them in jail while we talk about drowning of people. But this is also this is due to the times. Some people sort of live in this rosy world where like, why couldn't they be as moral, quote unquote, as we are today, where there's like, they wouldn't go about this. But you can't, if you bend a circle too quickly, it's going to crack. It takes time for these things to slowly but surely manifest. I always say that, like, the Declaration of Independence is in a certain sense like the secular Mount Sinai, right? It took like 2,000 years for the culture, Western culture, to galvanize into a place where they are coming out with like this kind of document right now for the people. So there was like a very big deal. So these things take time, and slowly but surely. And I also think that social justice movements, while they're going about it the wrong way, these are also indications of us moving towards a more moral place. Again, it's gone bonkers right now that we're letting everyone identify themselves how they want, but there's also something very amazing about letting someone identify themselves in that sense. So like, we as a community are really trying to figure out where that line is, but ultimately I think we're moving for more towards a better place.
So question here.
Yeah.
Why did it move to Aramaic?
Because this is Hillel talking, and this is during Hillel, if you remember earlier, this is Hillel talking, not during his time necessarily in Babylon, which could be one take, but even though this relates to the first thing, this relates to the context of also what happened at the time. So either he's saying this when he went back to Babylon, or he's saying this trying to be more discreet, because if you recall, Hillel is doing his thing during the period when King Herod is doing his thing. He's the king of Judea at the time. And King Herod, half Jewish and not a priest, couldn't be the priest in the temple, which he wanted that thing. He wanted that institution to keep moving for the power it held. And his nephew, Astrobulus, I'm not exactly sure the exact pronunciation of his name, but his nephew, he appoints him to be the high priest. And if I recall, he's very young. He's like 18. And when he comes to the temple, everyone sees like this rejuvenated face, also connected to like him rebuilding the temple. They're like, whoa, this is like really a whole new phase 2. This is fantastic. And they all start cheering. And he hears this and he gets very upset due to his Napoleon complex. And he comes and asks his nephew to come with him, to come visit him in his temple, in his vacation home in Jericho. And there's a pool there, which I think also was actually like found by archaeologists now. But in this pool, the story is in the Hasmonean scripts are that he gets drowned basically. And what I learned was this is what Hillel is referencing, basically. Like the skull that he saw raising from the water was, we are living in very, very violent times right now, where the high priest of the newly appointed high priest, which is the nephew of Herod, ends up getting himself killed because we're in this crazy circle of violence right now where people are very loose on the trigger. And that was sort of like why you're getting like this very strange, like he's seeing a skull floating in the water. So and it's also sort of like a general statement of the world is what we make it. If you're going to be leaving yourself in a place where you're just seeing skulls floating around, then then guess what? You found yourself in a circle. You found yourself in a circle of violence. I think
this is joint, so it means he either really disagrees or really agrees.
Right. We'll stop at this Mishnah till next week, but let's continue the conversation about what we just read. Yosef, it's yours again to tell us where we went wrong.
Sadly, I missed the last 15 minutes or so because I went through a dead zone, so I got cut off, which is why I lost the chat. So I don't know everything you got around, or right. I did want to say something. Maybe you discussed it. Something I had thought about with this mission that kind of occurred to me before was on the Marbebes Chora Lo Machtim.
Yeah.
That we can talk about it as Chora, like in the sense of whatever profession and trade and doing business. But I also think there's something deeper here too about and maybe you covered this when you approach the world where it's all about this kind of give and take, zero sum economic, tit for tat approach. You're not going to ever really find the wisdom. There's something kind of problematic with that very kind of economic, view of the world. That you'll never, and this gets into the whole, and that great conversation when Peterson first came back when, after being sick and rehab and all that stuff. No, with Vervaeke. And they had that whole conversation about philosophia versus philonikeia. And I think really here, right, I think that this is very much in that line of, it can't all be, this back and forth trade competition thing if you really want to get wisdom. And that then kind of backtracks through the Kapdan. Like we can go now retrospectively through the whole Mishnah and say in some ways that is the problem with the Kapdan and the Baishan and the board. Right? Is that they have this kind of reductive view of either I'm right or and that's good, or I'm wrong, and therefore I should be embarrassed, or either I'm right and I should defend that, and I should be a kapdan about it and get angry, if someone contradicts me or whatever, or you have this whole, yeah. So that was a thought I had that I had in maybe. I don't know what you talked about for 15 minutes though. So I feel bad, like I'm just dropping in.
No, it's great, and you're actually like, while we touched about this a little, I think you are really stressing the point, and I like the point about looking at the schora as also like this sort of binary sort of conversation and really removing us from that, like that binary conversation. Ben gave an interpretation where schora, it just meaning like less actual business, but more about like the schora you've accumulated over the years. Like if you're thinking like that general knowledge or that general wealth of knowledge is going to be sufficient, that not necessarily, you might be very knowledgeable, but not wise. Right. And I mentioned that relates a little to Moshe saying, Lo ish dvarim anochi, like I'm not a man of things. It's not like I can't speak, but rather like looking at that other interpretation of like what dvarim actually means or what schora actually means. I'm wondering though, if that binary, shows up anywhere else. It definitely shows up in the next Mishnah, where we have these 10 sets of things that, like, if you do this and you're not doing this, and if you do this, so we're pushing into that, a little more, which I'm with you. And just to expand on what Yosef is saying.
It's going to show up. It's going to also show up in Pirkei Avot in the whole shelach shelcha.
Right. Even and Ben, we were talking about this about paresh min hatzibur, right? We're saying like don't paresh min hatzibur. It's a bad. Don't do it. And at the same time, we're saying like we understand if, and we're also saying don't be part of the authorities. But on the other hand, be part of the authorities. Be a man. And if there's no man over there, then you need to be the man, right? So like there's, again, like you could assume we just said don't do that, and at the same time we're telling you yes, doing it in this way, and we see this all the way across. Like we're focusing on the need of learning Torah, right? That Talmud Torah connected kulam, and we also discussed like the Rambam's take of if you're just learning Torah without derech eretz, it's not relevant. Right, so so I think that's I really like that, Yosef. That's very deep. That just like when they say schora over here, they really bring it down. Like, just don't have a business mentality. Don't have that binary mentality about this whole thing. Yosef coming in at the last second, blowing it all up, changing everything. I'll take you quickly through, Yosef, what we spoke about and what you missed, but. We got a little into this about given the different interpretations of whether it's no one sees you, you should still be fighting your evil inclination. You should be the man to yourself internally. You should be present as a person, as an individual, less if there's leaders or not leaders. Just be present. Don't be welting in the corner. Or very much if you're in an immoral place, be the moral person, or if there's no leaders, be the leader. Then we ended with this last Mishnah, which is this very strange Mishnah that Hillel comes and says that he saw this floating skull in the water. And then he tells the skull that you drowned someone, and because of this, you were drowned. And the people that drowned you, they also are destined to be drowned. And we mentioned how this is really Hillel sort of speaking about the cycle of violence, which is very problematic, which is very hard to get yourself out of that cycle. B, stressing the fact that because that cycle is so problematic, leave this to the authorities. Don't involve yourself with getting in, seeking for this kind of justice yourself. And we touched a little about the ideas of a sanctuary city and its ramifications, and we lost him. And I'm doing all this chazara for him. All right. Then we said something about Yosef not knowing anything, this little that. What do we have over here? While we wait
Yosef
for Yosef.
In the new version of Pulp Fiction. I can see it.
Sorry, I think above it was Summer Drive. Okay. Okay. What is this? Does that connect to what Jacob was talking about with hearing is a fish?
Herring.
Yeah. Herring is a fish. I don't know what that's in relation to.
Me neither.
Herring is a fish, though.
Yeah.
That people eat.
I personally don't like it, but yes, it is a fish.
All right. On that note, gentlemen, Yosef, I'm sorry we lost you. We love you very much. All who joined that were here, thank you for joining as always. We look forward to having you again. Richard, it was very nice having you here. I hope what we said was somewhat understandable. And thank you for your own commentary, which was insightful as well. All of you have a fantastic week.
You too. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Chezi.
Don't look back at anger.